Let me just ask you, when it came to, again, in light of the Reuters report, in light of concerns that many of us have about Malaysia, China, some of us at least have strong concerns about Cuba and Uzbekistan, and even Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam has complicity in trafficking, particularly labor trafficking. Did any other concern, other than trade, such as a trade factor, in any way come into play with the administration's decision to upgrade Malaysia or Cuba or China? Again, I read the report on Cuba 3 times. It's excellent. It frames it, it gets it, it captures the information based on everything else I know and other sources, and yet it doesn't warrant an upgrade. And I'm wondering, in light of the rapprochement that's occurred between Washington and Havana, was that in any way a part of this? Anyway, because I would think that the TIP report made recommendations, and perhaps, Doc, you might want to speak to that. There should be more transparency in this process. I know very often the default is to say we can't say what we recommended, but we need to know that. This is all about a gross human rights abuse that disproportionately malaffects women and children. And you know, like as I said in my opening, you know, China had 35 convictions, watch list. Thailand had 151 convictions, tier 3. Malaysia had 3 convictions, and Cuba is down in the single digits as well. You know, Thailand must feel aggrieved with the juxtaposition of these other countries that got upgrades, and there appears to be other issues that come into play. I would note parenthetically that I was never more proud, and I am a very staunch supporter of Israel and South Korea, but during the previous administration, both Israel and South Korea were designated as tier 3 countries, because that's where the evidence took the administration. And frankly, both countries and did robust things, did tremendous things. South Korea passed new laws, and certainly, you know, I met with the ambassador from Israel several times. Their reporting, their closing up of brothels, just was extraordinary, and they got off tier 3 the old-fashioned way. They earned it. But then you look at it, was there any other factor in this continuum of decision made by TIP, goes on to the assistant secretaries, the deputy, the DASs, right up to Secretary Kerry and to President Obama? And if you could, and I hope you will, if you could provide us with who made these decisions at the end of the day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If I may begin, at least to answer that question. This year, when we prepared the 2015 TIP report, as in previous years, it was a truly deliberative, fact-based process of discussions between our experts throughout the State Department, both at our embassies and consulates overseas, with our colleagues in regional bureaus here in Washington, and experts in the TIP office. That is the same process that we use every year. We compare and assess government's efforts against that own government's efforts the previous year against the minimum standards as outlined in the TVPA, specifically looking at those criteria and whether or not the government has indeed made significant efforts to fulfill those minimum standards. That is the process that was true for all of the countries this year when we made those decisions. Ultimately, the final tier designations are made by the Secretary of State this year, as they are every year, by the authority given to him in the TVPA. So those decisions are in fact his to make, not the TIP not the TIP office or others in the State Department.
But again,
recommendations certainly
you do make a recommendation as to what the designation should be when there is a split. I mean, you've done. No one knows more about it than you, and the data calls that went out to the various embassies. They're on the ground. They know. And I think 15 years later, we are really getting it right, because every embassy I go to, and there are many, I always ask who's doing TIP here, and I'm always impressed just how seriously they take this. But again, my big question is, like with Malaysia, did the TPP play a role in that upgrade?
The Secretary himself has said publicly that TPP did not come into it. He did not consult others in the administration, nor did the White House or USTR weigh in. I have no knowledge that that came up in any other officials' discussions on this year designation for Malaysia or any other country.
How about with regards to Cuba? Again, the report is excellent in its detail. And I mean, when a country doesn't even acknowledge its forced labor, when it pimps out girls who are 16, and we know that the government runs the infrastructure for hotels and the like, and it's a very, very cruel exploitation of young girls and young boys. I'm just wondering, what was your recommendation of a tip, and then to the Bureau? Was it to keep it as Tier 3, Cuba?
As you yourself indicated, we don't discuss the internal deliberations and recommendations of the different parts of the State Department. There is a robust discussion. In the vast majority of cases, we reach consensus at the expert level, and discussions don't go further. There are some cases that the evidence may be pointing in different directions. As you know yourself, within the minimum standards, there are 4 minimum standards and 12 indicia in the 4th one. So there are a lot of different factors we're looking at. In some cases, they all point in the same direction of either progress or lack thereof. In some cases, they're mixed, as was the case in Malaysia, that we saw increased prosecutions and investigations, but a decline in convictions. So when we do have more complicated situations like that, the discussions do go further up the chain, and ultimately the Secretary makes the decision.
But again, on this increased prosecutions, without objection, the testimony of Most Reverend the Bishop of Seattle, Alonzo, who led the Catholic Conference led a delegation to Malaysia. They make the point that despite the presence of an anti-trafficking law, the delegation learned that the government offers little or no protection or rescue to victims. And then on the very issue you just mentioned, while Malaysia has increased arrests for human traffickers, the conviction rate remains low due to the ability of the traffickers to bribe or threaten officials. That's exactly what we thought we corrected in previous iterations of the TVPA, that it's all about, it's not just how many arrests you make and then put that out as a neon light. Look at all these arrests. What good is it if there's no convictions and nobody does real time or have their assets seized that they've gleaned through such a nefarious enterprise? So, again, if there is a way you can tell us who made these decisions. I mean, TPP had no impact on this? Mr. Caruso, you might want to speak to that? I mean, the Senate was very robust, including my senior senator, in raising this issue, Bob Menendez. So,
I can tell you in every meeting I was ever in to discuss this, the discussions were strictly related to the fact of the trafficking person situation in the countries involved, and that included the reports we got in from the embassy.
If I may add, also you asked about the importance of the TVPA and the criteria outlined therein in the discussions. Absolutely, they are central. And in the case of Malaysia, we did look across the 3 Ps, and as you noted, we have serious concerns about victim protection in Malaysia. That has been our #1 recommendation in the last several years in the TIP report, encouraging the government to fundamentally change how it treats trafficking victims. They have essentially been held in government shelters that essentially serve as detention facilities where the victims have neither freedom of movement nor the right to work. And that has been our top priority recommendation in the last several years because, as you point out, it is a very serious concern. The government did make significant efforts over the course of the 2015 reporting period and in the 2014 calendar year to improve that. And the amendments that were passed just after the reporting period ended do seek to fundamentally revise that system. We are cautiously optimistic that once they are implemented, they will make meaningful progress in this area.